Hello, everyone. I'm here today to talk to you about why continuous compliance is key to really scaling and building an effective compliance program. So just start by giving a little bit of background about myself. So my name is Matthew Davies. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management at SureCloud. I've been working in GRC, technology and IT risk assurance for the last 8 years. In that time, working for PwC, Deloitte, working with the likes of RSA Archer, ServiceNow GRC, Auris GRC, IBM Open Pages, and BWise. I've got a breadth of knowledge across GRC technology and experience, kind of using these tools to support GRC frameworks and automate and optimize these processes and frameworks. We are going to have a bit of a Q&A at the end, so if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along, and we'll answer them at the end. The presentation's about 20 to 25 minutes, so if there is questions, again, we've got plenty of time to go through any at the end. So for anyone who's kind of attended any of these before, I've been through a couple of these and they might seem fairly similar, but one of the things here is about, we'll talk through the challenges for today's security and compliance professionals. I think the first thing that we want to talk about here is really ensuring business is done quickly and securely. But at the same time, this shouldn't be doing things kind of to introduce new risks. And we know a lot of businesses are dealing with digital transformation at the moment, and it's a very difficult line to tread when obviously you want to digitize your business, but at the same time, make sure that it's done quickly and securely. So we all know that's a big challenge for security and compliance professionals. The second one is reducing the amount of duplicate, repetitive compliance processes. The evidence collection and asking for the information and all those controls is extremely repetitive, and it takes people a lot of time to do that, be on the business side and on the compliance side to rationalize it once to get it together. The third one is understanding the ever-increasing number of compliance requirements. We know that there's many different requirements coming from all different IT, privacy, information security. They're from all over the place that you've got to deal with. And then trying to rationalize them into a common set of controls or trying to test them all individually is a big challenge for people. And then finally is simplifying that testing and evidence collection. Ultimately, what you want to be doing here is trying to simplify all of these points above to make the testing much easier on the business, so they feel like they're getting value from it. But it is a challenge to try and keep on top of your compliance requirements, but at the same time, try and optimize it and make it more efficient process. So let's walk through a bit of a traditional compliance program and talk about organizations. So organizations have things that govern them. And again, there's many things here, be they be regulations. So you've got your privacy regulations like CCPA, GDPR, there's many others of these. Standards, so things like ISO 27001, 22301, things that you want to adhere to. There's frameworks, so things like the CSA, NIST, COSO, ISF standards of good practice. There's many of these out there that organizations want to adopt and have embedded in their programs. You've got your internal policies and procedures, so things like employee handbooks, fair usage policy, all kinds of things that you want to make sure that people are baselining and then behaving against. Contractual requirements, and this can be contractual requirements that you are putting on your customers that you want to make sure that's happening, or that third parties are impressing on you. So there's plenty here to get on top of that you need to make sure that you're complying with. And you need to make sure you review and check all of these things to make sure your organization is operating within the bounds that control it. You've then got a compliance team who are responsible for managing the compliance framework, so documenting all of the risks, controls, making sure that they're reviewed within the right time scales. Ultimately, they're not responsible for it, but the processes, procedures, and what's going on, they're responsible for keeping on top of. Reviewing and checking compliance documentation. So once the documentation is prepared for your controls or whatever it is, that someone is reviewing it, challenging it, making sure that it makes sense and what is in there is sensible. Producing reports to the business on compliance status. So making sure that there's a view of compliance. So each of the business stakeholders and senior leadership know what's going on. Compliance testing, audits and spot checks, making sure they're scheduled in place and that the evidence is reviewed and that you're on top of anything that you need to be producing. Supporting preparation and documents and evidence collection for external reviews. So things like your external audits, you might have SOC 2 reports, you may be SOCs, ISO 27001, so many of these things that you've got external reviews that are going on that you need to keep on top of. And obviously interacting with the regulators and external bodies to make sure that any changes, things that are coming up or things that you have to report to them are done within due course. And finally, you've got the poor business stakeholders at the end who are being asked to prepare compliance documentation. And often it's for each of those compliance requirements. They're doing it in Excel, PowerPoint, Word, PDF. They're asked to collect that document and send it back that someone has to review. Collect evidence for audit. So again, they're being asked for the same thing multiple times because there's a lot of overlapping requirements. They're probably trying to sift through email, shared drives to find that information. They're responsible for seeking approval for when there's changes. So when technology changes or there's new technology, that they make sure all the right things are in place, that they've discussed with the security and compliance teams to make sure it's done. Responsible for remediating timescales, remediating findings in short timescales. And again, this is often due to the audit scheduling because there's testing done at a specific time of the year, which gives us only a specific time to do it. They make sure that they're trying to understand these findings and then remediate them within the given timeframes. And then the final one is that there's a lot of duplication here. So when they are remediating the findings, is it actually a finding that they want to keep on top of? Because there's many compliance programs or initiatives that are running, and often there's duplicates between them because of the overlap in the requirements. Right, so what are kind of the challenges and what does this look like? So, I mean, organizations have many different compliance requirements and security requirements that they need to adhere to. I'm not going to go through examples in this webinar. I did it in a prior one, but often there's different language, format, and levels of detail in each of these requirements, and they're often very similar but not identical asks. There are easy ones to identify duplicate requirements like policy controls, etc., but there are some where it's not as easy to identify those things. For each regulation and standard, it often requires you to do some kind of periodic review or audit to make sure you're meeting that requirement. That is done with your compliance team, your security team, in conjunction with the business to make sure they're collecting the evidence. And what happens is, in a lot of cases, the auditees manually collect evidence and documentation. Again, this is probably going to core systems, exporting data, be that be SAP, could be any of your finance systems. It also could be IT systems like ServiceNow, Jira, all kinds of things, Remedy, depending on what they're using. They then submit that information back and then take that documentation, and someone has to review it and identify if there's any non-conformities and make sure it's passing exactly what's needed. At the end, the business are really bombarded with multiple audits per year, very similar asks, and they end up spending most of their time and resources just to kind of keep on top of what they're being asked to do right now. They're never able to take a step back between the compliance team, the business team, and the operations team to go, how can we make this more efficient? Each requirements that you add makes it more complex, more time consuming, and there's additional manual processes that are added throughout the year. And I think the thing to think about here is the compliance team are spending a lot of time just being administrators of asking for evidence, reviewing, and the business feel like they're not getting value, and what they're doing is ultimately just asking over and over again for very similar things. And they don't really often understand the difference between what's being asked from a NIST control and a PCI. If it's a policy control, it's the same thing to them. So what are the challenges with this approach? I think the first one is it's manual, repetitive, and often disparate. I mean, that's not always the case in all organizations, but a lot of these programs get set up individually, not brought back together, or if they do under one umbrella, they're kind of still not really aligned. They ultimately end up being very labor intensive for compliance professionals, as I said, for those kind of things, and the business team. So the business end up being admins. The compliance team end up doing a lot of administrative work, which is just chasing and following up to get the information. And the business team lose faith in the value. Ultimately, they think compliance is just a checkbox activity. And kind of if you pull on to the next one here is, it ends up being focused on point in time assessments, where compliance doesn't really account for the time between audits and reviews, where things can substantially change. I mean, if we take the rate of change in technology, and is an annual audit adequate for the rate of change in technology? Probably not. And if you're doing maybe even half yearly, are you getting enough information to understand your compliance position throughout the year? And how can you improve on that? It's seen as, again, a once-a-year activity by stakeholders that really just slows down business operations and doesn't add much value beyond being compliant. You're asked the same thing because a lot of the time, all these compliance requirements are not aligned. So you end up with lots and lots of people being asked multiple times to end up creating hundreds of compliance artifacts using email, share drives, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all over the place. There's lots of these things that people are trying to keep on top of. And then reporting an aggregate view becomes almost impossible because, again, they're all from different formats, sources, and it's almost impossible to see things in real time. So it becomes someone's full-time job to basically create compliance reports, so they can't keep on top of it. So how do we address this challenge? Well, I'd say the simple answer is moving to a state of continuous compliance. And well, what does that mean? I mean, continuous compliance it's really, and I'll walk through this, it's about managing your compliance requirements in a proactive manner throughout your year in your business and IT environments. And really, it's about shifting a culture and creating a proactive culture and strategy to review compliance on an ongoing basis. So I think there's a couple of key messages here, but it's about moving away from those ad hoc audits and checks to really looking to create live compliance documentation using a combination of people, processes, and technology. So by sorting the process out and adding technology, it will allow the people to free up their time from focusing on administrative things like sending out control tests, just checking things, really to being able to say, actually, we are reviewing things, we're able to deal with the high value items and some of those kind of long-term goals rather than just trying to keep the lights on. Second one is you can standardize your processes to simplify testing and evidence collection. You can also look here at embedding kind of baseline control sets that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then you can use technology to automate these processes. So you can have workflows, emails, notifications. So you can be doing little and often assessments where you're doing monthly, quarterly self-assessments. So the business are not just thinking of compliance as something we have to do at the end of the year. It's something we're being asked to do throughout the year, and it's not a rush at the end. The other thing you can do here is introduce technology to fully automate certain controls. So once you baseline and have a good standardized control set, actually you can use technology to analyze core systems. So if you're integrating to a ServiceNow or other tool where there's key information, you can integrate to it, retrieve the data, run analysis over it, and actually test those controls and make sure they're operating in real time. So you're not worrying about, actually, I need to do an assessment every quarter. You can say every day, every week, I know how this control is operating. So I have a real-time view of compliance. I'm going to stop there. We've got a bit of a poll. We've got a poll question here. So one of the poll questions is your organization considering a continuous compliance program? So I'll give everyone a bit of time here. And we'll review the results a little bit later. Okay, so I'll keep the poll open and we'll review it in a couple of slides' time. So what makes a continuous compliance program? The first thing to think about here is, and I think the most important one is more collaboration between security, compliance, and operations. Ultimately, they are not aligned at the moment, and each of them are working to completely different objectives. I think we can learn a lot from what's happened in like DevOps here, where ultimately you want to bring them together to work on a common set of objectives. So this really allows them to say, actually, we're working towards a continuous compliance program. We're all aligned on the value of this, and we can actually get the most out of it, and we're working on this together. The other thing is they all see each other's perspective and work much, much closer together. I think this is key to any continuous compliance program. The second one is ongoing assurance and assessments throughout the year. We're moving away from actually saying for 9-10 months of the year, it's not something we worry about the business, to saying actually we want to do assessments. Ongoing, we want you to collect that evidence. So actually when it comes to the audit, we already have it there. We're ready and we can create these documents and evidence much, much easier because it's not a rush. It's something that we're doing little and often throughout the year. That leads into live compliance documentation and artifacts that allows you to really demonstrate compliance throughout the year. So you can generate those documents, you have all the evidence in place. It makes it much, much easier because you're taking a much more proactive approach to collecting that evidence to make it much more continuous. Automation of manual processes, so things like your documentation of controls, scheduling tests, evidence collections and reviews. You can use process automation, workflow, scheduling to really make your life a lot easier. And a lot of this is technology driven. This last attribute, let's say, it's not what makes a continuous compliance program, but it makes it a lot better. I think if you are running this with a non-standardized set of controls, or at least a fairly rationalized set of controls, it makes it very, very difficult to move to a continuous state of compliance. And that's not saying you have to do it for everything, but one of the things to think about is how can you rationalize and really make that control list much more succinct to enable it to be much easier to monitor in real time and deploy so it's consistent throughout the organization. So what are some practical steps to kind of embed this in your program? I mean, as I said before, I mean, you need to develop a strategy and mission for your organization of why we're doing this. And again, security operations and compliance, or whichever the key functions that you need involved, is bringing them together to understand why we're doing this and what we're doing to kind of, and why this is a long-term thing that makes sense for us. The second one is develop a realistic scope. You're probably not going to move your entire program to this straight away. So what are the things that you're asked about the most that are high value items to the business? And again, there can be some trade-offs here when you're talking to the business and agreeing that strategy, but identifying the things where actually there's quite a lot of overlap in these three compliance requirements, we can probably quite easily standardize them and make our life a lot easier. Make sure you've got the organization policies, procedures and standards and the review cycles of how you're going to run this. So it's fully thought through before you embed it. Again, focus on high value assets. So again, do you need to embed this continuous program in everything? Probably not. So focus on your critical assets or critical processes, the things that are most important to you. And again, biggest bang for your buck in this kind of area. Establish and implement the appropriate controls. So once you've understood the areas, you've baselined that control set, you can establish and implement those controls for that area. So you've got them, again, maybe start small, 2 or 3 requirements and add to it over a couple of years. Second is then you can start to test, review and improve those controls. So you can really move away from doing one compliance program at a time. You've got 3 or 4 running in one program. We're testing them throughout the year. We're reviewing them at much more frequent cycles. And then when we see those improvements, actually those improvements, if we see it in a policy control, is embedded in all our policy controls. It's not different then in each of the requirements. We're bringing it together, making it much, much easier. This enables us to have a continuous insight from testing and monitoring. So those standardized controls means that we can see, again, live compliance reporting throughout the year. We're not waiting for actually we've got an audit in December. We'll get all the information in December and the rest of the year we're running blind thinking things are going well. You've got a much clearer sight of what's going on. This allows you then to move to that live documentation so you can actually produce compliance documents in real time and you can communicate updates to all your key stakeholders. So really you're moving away there from spending someone's full time really just producing reports, which often you have to manipulate and are not a true sense of what's going on because all of the data is coming from different formats. You're having to do some exercise to kind of manipulate it to make it a rationalized view of compliance reporting. Okay, so we're just going to review the poll question. So I'm just going to open the poll up. So we've got a pretty unanimous thing here of, I think everyone but one has said yes, that it's something that they're considering moving. It's great. I guess, is there any other questions around how or examples of this? Please feel free to ask them now. And then when we get to the end, I will go through them. So I'm going to end the poll there. But yeah, there's a unanimous thing that people are wanting to do this. So how can SureCloud help? One of the things that we do is we support standardized compliance frameworks, likes of SCF, UCF, and HITRUST as well. So you can integrate to any of them for baseline controls. It really makes your life easier than rather than starting from your beginning. If you're wanting to embed baseline controls, I spoke about it a lot on the prior webinar, so feel free to have a look at that. But yeah, I think starting with something that's already there, that's done some of the mapping for you, makes your life a lot easier. Again, we provide automated updates to any of the ones we support to give you the differences between them, because one of the challenges with baseline controls is keeping them in sync. We support the scheduling, maintenance, and evidence collection of your assessments. So you can set them up, conduct your scheduling, and do your evidence collection. This allows you to maintain one single source of truth centrally and report on compliance in real time. We've spent a lot of time over the last year or so really building a continuous compliance module where we can actually integrate into any third-party system and monitor compliance from it. So using business rules and logic, you can actually integrate to third-party tools, pull over that data, and then get a real-time view in it. So you can say, actually, we don't want any vulnerabilities over X number of days for this criticality of system that's not been resolved, patching systems. It could be anything that you want us to integrate to and can run business rules on. So you can get a real-time view of compliance and check the controls in real time. And finally, this allows you to create live compliance documents and track remediation and exception requests in real time. So I guess, what are the key recommendations here? And I mean, the first one, it might seem obvious. Again, very aligned to what's been happening in DevOps, is closer alignment of compliance, security, and operations. And again, it might be slightly different in your organization, but by bringing them together, working on a common set of goals, it becomes an enabler to a business of we're doing compliance for the right things, we're working together to a common set of goals, and we can enable things like digital transformation, get better at it, because we can bring on systems quicker, we can make sure we're on top of things. Develop ongoing compliance processes, so embed process automation, so take away using your compliance professionals, basically just checking on controls, reviewing these things, that they can use process automation to collect the evidence and monitor compliance in real time. Finally, move to producing live compliance documentation so you can keep on top of it. It's really simplifying audits and compliance reporting. The audit fatigue that you get from a lot of business stakeholders, if they're being asked to do something that they understand throughout the year as a common set of controls, understand why they're doing it, it should make it easier. Second. Okay. And finally, so as I said, this will allow to simplify the audit, your testing burden, and makes things a lot easier. So I'm going to move to the Q&A here, and I'm going to just pull over and read some of these questions. So, so the first one, it's all great, but I've already got compliance programs I'm managing. Should I invest in continuous compliance when I've already got a compliance program up and running and delivering results? So I think the answer to that is yes, but I think one of the things that you have to think about is if it's up and running and you want to deliver some more results, I think, first of all, it will give you a much more proactive approach to compliance and bringing them together. You really want to make sure that actually we're not dealing with 4 or 5 different compliance regimes. We want to simplify that. It gives you a better level of assurance because, again, you're testing throughout the year. You're giving better value to the business and to whoever that actually we have a good view of our controls and we can stay on top of it. The other one is it should reduce audit fatigue. Business stakeholders always complain about this, where they're saying, actually, I don't see the value in this. It's not adding anything to me. How can I make it better? And it should really improve efficiency. Again, it's not a we start it tomorrow and it makes things better, but it's a long-term investment for how we can do that. There's another question. Given that I already have a compliance program, what are the building blocks in order to support a program like this? And is there any overlap? So I think the first one is you need a well-defined framework. And if you haven't got a well-defined framework and you don't have an understanding of the controls, you should probably do that before trying to kind of make it continuously compliant and automate it. There's no point trying to automate 4 versions of the same thing. You should really try and simplify that, either using, again, the example that I spoke about in the previous webinar, or going in and saying, we do that ourselves. We'll rationalize our control set and make it a lot easier. Like baseline frameworks really help here. You need a clear strategy and business buy-in. This isn't a thing that you're just going to be able to get people to buy in straight away. It's going to really change a lot of goals of different teams to make them embed compliance in. It's more compliance by design. Then they're much more involved in how it works, and they understand the value in it throughout the year. And obviously you need the skills, you need the people, you need the processes in place and the technology to enable it. So again, it is a lot of steps and things that you need to do, but again, the value at the end is a much, much more efficient compliance program. If we've got another question. So what is a realistic time frame to embed this type of program? I think 12 months really for planning, refining, and embedding. And really what I'm assuming there is that you've got a lot of the core things in place. If you haven't, it will be longer. Like I say, if you've not rationalized your framework, depending on what the scope of it is, it will take longer. So again, be realistic with your scope, focus on the big ticket items. So the frameworks and things that cause you the most pain, and then really try and align them and make it much, much easier. But again, I think 12 months is a realistic time frame because it will take time to embed and get these practices in the business. So that's the last of the questions. So to carry on the conversation, get in touch with SureCloud on our LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram. We've got an upcoming webinar. So we have a series of, we do some cyber threat briefings once a month. Feel free to register for that. We also got some upcoming events coming soon and again, they're not listed yet, but they'll be coming soon. So keep an eye out. I think there's going to be some on UK SOX, CMMC. So keep a lookout on that there. And again, my email's there if you've got any questions. I'm always happy to talk, and my LinkedIn's there. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed that.